So this is going to be a relatively unstructured kind of video. Honestly, I don't have a lot of good topics for videos right now, so I'm just going to be doing a bit of an update. It's been a few months since I've done the last one of these. Basically just how things are going. I do have to say that I am seeing, I would say, probably the best results that I've ever seen in my life over maybe the past year or so in terms of my training. That's been with a few different setbacks. So a major one was that I had a big move in December. So in December, obviously, wasn't really eating much at all, lost a bunch of weight. I lost about 5 kilos within the month. And at the same time, I also started having some kind of issue, which is apparently gout. So I had to figure that out, deal with that, get my diet in order. And of course, I just wasn't really able to train very well either. And so I lost a lot of progress over the course of December. But I would say that up until that point, most of 2025 was going super well. Basically, I was just really able to focus on my training and lock in a way that I've really not been able to do consistently for a long period of time. Obviously, I was doing pretty well in 2016, 2017. I was pretty locked in. I was hitting PRs. 2018, I was, moving to the UK. And so that threw things off a bit, just sort of, getting used to my new surroundings. And at the time, I also did not have a good bench press option that was pretty safe. So I couldn't really train my bench very hard. Then obviously 2019 did okay, but I wasn't really super locked in. 2020 happened, pandemic. The next couple of years, obviously I was focusing on calisthenics stuff, and so I wasn't really able to focus on training for size, training for strength in the same way. And I just kind of got lean and was like, all right, have some fun with it, great. But obviously I wasn't seeing, numbers going up the way I was used to, the way I wanted. And then, 2023, started cautiously going to the gym again. Really took a while to get back to really where I was. In 2024, I had a knee issue and basically just a lot of inconsistency in some ways. It was really most of 2024 where I was really starting to see some numbers. I was seeing my squat in particular going really well after I got through my knee issue, but it was taking time, right? And then 2025 is when I really was seeing really, really good numbers. I was seeing things just moving up and up and up. And it's also where I got to the point where I had an issue that I made a video about a few months back where essentially I got so good with my squat that it was starting to impact my ability to actually recover and, deadlift in the same way. And so I had to just totally restructure my training in order to actually be able to actually keep my deadlift progressing. Because for me, I care a lot more about my deadlift than I care about my squat. And so I ended up basically just deprioritizing squatting entirely. And since then, basically, I've been focusing more on my bench, more on my deadlift, and so on. And it's been going really well. It was going really, really well in 2025. It got to the point where I was starting to see numbers above my previous records. My best deadlift was about 250 kilos back in 2016. And obviously, for all the reasons I've just laid out, things were kind of frozen for a while, just wasn't really pushing the numbers. 2025 is when I started to see those numbers increasing a little bit, right? Like I was doing things like 240 for 5. There's okay, actually starting to push over 250 finally in terms of my estimated 1RM. And then obviously December happened. Obviously with that also we had just losing 5 kilos, just not being able to train, diet being all over the place, gout, all the other issues, stress, just everything all at once, right? And so couldn't really train, saw a drop off there. Now, however, I would say that since then, I have seen probably the most rapid period of growth that I've ever seen. And I want to sort of talk about what has changed and what is different versus what I was doing in 2025 versus what I was doing now. So obviously the biggest and the foremost thing is that this is the first time that I've had a garage in a very long time. I had a garage way back when I lived in Detroit, back in 2012. And that was lovely. Bought myself a squat rack, bought everything I needed. I was also working in 24-hour gyms at the time, and so I had super easy access to a lot of equipment. So I could work out all the time, easy access to equipment, numbers kept going up, great, love it, etc. And then obviously, just because of how my life has changed, how I've moved around, I've just not been able to work out in that way since then. Working out from commercial gyms, working out from sometimes, powerlifting or bodybuilding gyms, but more often than not, just commercial gyms. And that's obviously presented its own difficulties, right? So I was working out at this chain here in the UK called Pure Gym. It's basically just a 24-hour budget gym chain. Works fine, does what it says on the tin, has decent equipment. However, in general, just because of the way that my career is structured now and sort of how my work is structured, really the only time that I'm able to work out consistently is early in the mornings. And I am not enough of a morning person that I could really get there before anybody else does, like 4, 5, 6 a.m. So I get to the gym 7:30 in the morning and then, work out for an hour and a half, whatever. And, at that point, you've got a lot of other morning gym goers coming in at the same time, and, you're dealing with that. Not as many as you get, during the middle of the day or obviously at peak hours after work, but a decent amount of people. And so for me, that meant that I really struggled at times to just have access to equipment. Like generally, they had plenty of squat racks. You can get a hold of squat racks pretty easy. But a lot of the other accessory movements I was doing, a lot of machines, sometimes you're waiting an hour for the Smith machine to be done with or what have you. And so I was not able to really do a very strict program. What I basically did was I did a very flexible program where essentially what I would do is I had like sort of 4 different sort of days scheduled out, and each day would have a specific top end lift that I would do. So essentially be like, okay, this is heavy bench day, this is heavy deadlift day, etc. And then everything after that would just be accessories, and accessories I just let be completely flexible. So just, okay, hit 4 or 5 accessories today, whatever you can do, whatever you have equipment available for, and just make sure you're trying to do everything once a week. So make sure that you're just trying to get everything in, pretty consistently. And that works super well within those constraints. But it also just obviously means that, I just didn't have the ability to just have all the equipment I needed when I needed it. And that meant that my training schedule was inconsistent. And while I was still progressing, I was still getting everything in, it wasn't progressing as ideally as I would have liked, and not as well as if I had had a more stable program. And so that was a major issue. Now, obviously, moving here, having a garage, I now have equipped it with, basically everything I need. I have a squat rack, I have barbells, I have dumbbells, basically everything I need. And there's a few exercises, there's a few things that are maybe difficult to hit, or things where, I'm not quite doing it optimally just because of whatever. But in general, it's just been so much of a blessing. It's been so much easier to just have access to equipment at your fingertips where, basically just anytime I can be like, okay, it's my lunch break. I'm going to go work out for a bit, or, okay, I didn't finish my workout this morning, but I can do it this evening, or, what have you. I just have complete flexibility to do exactly what I want, exactly when I want to do it. And that means that my training routine is now extremely stable. I'm doing things in the exact same order every single week in the exact same days. Basically, I'm training Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday, and I'm hitting the same lifts every time, perfect recovery in between, and things are lovely. Like, it's going super great. So that's been, I would say, one of the major factors is just how much better that workflow is for me, how much easier it is just to get everything in with all of this equipment, not having to wait for things, not having to fight for things, just, great, have it in my own space, do my own thing. The second major change I would say is just that I have been a lot more consistent about my diet and about my cardio. That's just been something where I've been able to really lock in on that as well, where I'm being a lot better also about supplementation. Generally, I was hitting my protein targets pretty easily, But I was being very lazy about doing things like making sure that I'm hitting my leucine supplementation or making sure that I'm hitting my creatine supplementation. I got very lazy about that for quite a while, and now I'm really getting better about actually hitting it again every single time. I've also been better about sleep. I had a big issue where basically I would wake up in the morning and the first thing I'd do is like I'd take out my phone and then I'd spend, I don't know, 30, 45 minutes just scrolling around on social media before doing anything, getting out of bed. And sometimes that would end up going on longer. And that was obviously not ideal. And I tried putting, like the iOS default locking stuff on your phone, but they make it super easy to just tap a button and undo it. So it's like, why would you even bother? Like, it's no blocker at all. So I ended up getting one of these brick things. Basically, the way that it works is that it's just one of those little physical devices where you actually have to go tap your phone on the device to unblock things, which is wonderful because it means I can just put that downstairs and then I just, block things. And then, I can't actually open social media until I get downstairs. And that alone is like saved me a ton of time. Like basically I'm better about waking up. I'm better about not wasting much time in the mornings. That's really just helped a lot in terms of like regulating my schedule. So really there, like the main thing is not anything shocking, anything new. It's just I've been better at nailing down the basics. Again, just hitting my protein, hitting my leucine, hitting my creatine, hitting my calorie targets. Lovely. Everything's good. The next thing is that I have been using the Macro Factor Workouts app. Basically, we launched this app this year, and it has been super, super, super useful for me. It's an app that works better with the sort of rigid structure of a program that I have now than the flexible program that I had previously when I was training at Pure Gym. It just does a really, really good job of telling me like, hey, I think you can handle more this week than you think you can. And me going, okay, I'll try it, I'll push it. And then going, oh yeah, I actually can do better this week than I thought I could. Macrofactor Workouts basically suggests progressions for you based on your prior data and just like how much you can tend to improve from week to week. And that has been super, super critical for me because it's just pushed me a lot harder than I would naturally push myself, honestly. It has pushed me more often to add weight or more often to add more reps than I would have done myself. Whereas I think in the past, I tended to really fall into particular routines in terms of exactly how much weight I added or exactly how many reps I added. Basically a very common progression that I used to do for kind of like a mix of strength and size would be like a 4 to 8 rep range. So what I would do is I'd do, 3 sets of 4, then the next week 3 sets of 5, 3 sets of 6, 3 sets of 7, 3 sets of 8. And then after obviously 5 weeks of that, then you add 2.5 kilos and you start over again, right? That works great. It works super well. But I would often find that I was actually, progressing a lot faster than that. But I was, obviously intentionally slowing myself down by sticking to that progression over time versus a lot of situations where maybe I could have added more than 1 rep per week, or I could have just gone ahead and bumped up to the next weight, even though I wasn't necessarily hitting 3 sets of 8 reps every single time. So that's something that Macrofactor has helped a lot with in terms of just like pushing me to go like, no, you can handle more this week. You don't need to like follow a very strict progression. You can actually go outside of these typical progressions that you relied on a lot in the past. And that's really the benefit of it, is that I think when you are working with clients as a coach, it's very helpful to rely on progressions, very specific progressions, because obviously you kind of need to standardize your approach with people. You kind of need to standardize just what you're doing because you don't want to push somebody too hard in general, and you kind of need to err on the side of caution. And at the same time, you just don't necessarily have the specific data that something like Macrofactor Workouts has in terms of like, okay, being able to assess at a high level what a client's progression from week to week looks like. So as a result, I think you tend to, as a coach, just rely on these like very formulaic progressions simply because they work well, even if they're maybe not quite the best fit for everybody. And then, of course, as a coach, seeing that these progressions work well, that these formulas work well when applied to lots of people, you obviously start to internalize that with your own training as well. And you start to say, okay, well, great, this progression works well for 10 of my clients, so obviously it should work for me as well. And of course it does. But of course, also at the same time, it's important to recognize how, if you're a coach and you're an athlete, like you really, really believe in pushing yourself very hard, there is a gap, right, between how you can train personally and how other people can train. Sometimes I forget that. So that's been a super powerful thing that Macrofactor Workouts has taught me, is basically just like, hey, getting out of your headspace where you have to use particular progressions all the time and just letting it sort of push you a little bit more than you would naturally yourself. On that topic, another major thing, number 4, is essentially fractional plates. I know that we make fun of fractional plates a lot, but I think they are seriously one of the biggest things that have been contributing to my gains recently. So fractional plates are itty bitty plates. In general, when you have plates that go onto a barbell, the lowest plate, the smallest plate that you will see, is either 2.5 pounds or 1.25 kilos, which means that you're looking at like a 5 pound or a 2.5 kilo minimum weight each time you change. And that's fine. It's a pretty small number. It allows a lot of precision in terms of loading, a lot more precision than you get with dumbbells in most cases. So that is part of the reason why barbell exercises are so scalable after a certain point, because once you can handle the bar, once you can handle a decent amount of weight with an exercise, then you can add very precise, very small amounts of weight. And that's great. That is part of the reason why barbell exercises are so beloved, are so powerful, are so good. But at the same time, when you're talking somebody who is a very beginner, who has very, very small numbers to start off with, or somebody who is very, very advanced, somebody who progresses relatively slowly on a week-by-week basis, those increments may be too big. So when you are talking about somebody who is starting off very, very light, so let's say you've got a woman who has never trained before, she can barely bench press the 35-pound starter bar. So she can bench press 35 pounds, let's say. If you want to go to the next weight increment up with the standard weight plates, you're saying, okay, 5 pounds, right? So now you're going from 35 to 40 pounds. That is a relatively big jump, actually. So that is you talking about adding 5 pounds out of 35 pounds, or about 1/7 of the current weight, which is like 15%, something like that. Okay, I did the math. It's 14.3%, just to be precise. Okay. So you take that. That is a huge relative jump. You might not think it. 14% may not sound huge, but it is. When you're talking an appropriate progression, often you might talk about 5% or less. And so we're talking about sort of 3 times the size of that, right? And so then basically, like any amount of weight that you add is going to be too big of a jump. And so because of that, you kind of have to overshoot this by sort of training in higher rep ranges or something like that at the 35 until you have really the ability to move up to the 40 within a decent rep range. And this is something that a lot of people don't get, because obviously if you're taking the same person, let's say that now she's been training for a few years and she can handle 100 pounds on a bench press, right? Now, if you add 5 pounds, it is a 5% increase rather than the 14.3% increase that we're talking about previously. So that might be an appropriate adjustment there. Still a decent bit on the large side, but much more appropriate. You take somebody who is, say, somebody who can handle 300 pounds. You're talking like 1.6 repeating percent. That's so tiny. It's like a very small adjustment, right? So when you're starting out with lighter weights, any adjustment that you make is much bigger, and it can be helpful in that point to have smaller plates. Now, conversely, on the other end of the spectrum, let's take somebody who can handle that, say, 300-pound bench press, right? But let's also say that that person has been training for a long period of time, like, for example, me, I've been training for 20 years, and you may not progress very much from week to week. You may progress 1% or less, right? And so if we're saying, hey, I can progress 1% from week to week on average versus somebody who is less trained who might be able to progress 5% per week or maybe more than that. So let's say that 1% for me with my 350-pound bench press is like 3.5 pounds. That is less, obviously, than the 5 pounds that is the minimum increment. And so what do I do in that situation? Well, again, I can either take too large of an increment, go up to 5 pounds, or spend more time at the current weight before adding weight, increase my reps, and so on. There's an easy solution, which is the fractional plates. So your fractional plates are just basically plates that are smaller than that. They will often be much smaller. I have a fractional plates down to a half a kilo, which means that my minimum weight is now down to 1 kilo from the 2.5 kilos that it used to be, which gives me plenty of space to make smaller adjustments and see optimal progress from week to week. It's also something that works very well with macrofactor workouts, because macrofactor workouts, basically, the more precision that you can give it in terms of the increments that you can use, the better it can give you weights that are an appropriate progression from week to week. And so it might be something where I might have struggled to go from, say, like 120 kilo to 122.5 kilo. But now I can be like, okay, well, that's fine. I can just do 121 kilo and, everything looks good. And while it gets a lot of, like hate, I would say, like fractional plates get thought of a lot as like baby stuff for women. But I mean, genuinely, they've been super, super helpful for me in terms of like actually being able to see tiny bits of progress from week to week consistently versus spending, 1 week struggling at one weight and then the next week struggling at another weight and, just making adjustments that are too big. So this has been like super, super useful for me. I would honestly credit this to a lot of my recent progress. It's just that I'm able to just be like, you know what, doesn't matter. I'm going to pick a more appropriate progression, even if it falls somewhere between in those smaller fractional increments than what I would have been able to do before. And as a result, I'm like really seeing crazy stuff. Basically, the other day I hit a 245 kilo for 4 deadlift, which is crazy. That's basically better than the best I was doing last year at a heavier weight. It's better than, basically, again, my previous max in the year 2016 was 250. I genuinely, I'm in my 30s now. I'm turning 36 this year. I've been lifting now for basically 20 years. And I would say that I've never seen such rapid gains outside of the very, very first year that I was seriously training with a good program. And obviously that's also with a little bit of age catching up to me. I mean, in general, so long as you keep training, your 30s are fine. It's really not until your 50s and your 60s that you really start to see huge drop-offs. But I mean, the fact that I'm now in my 30s, starting to smoke the stuff I was doing in my 20s has been very exciting for me. It's been a huge, huge win. And I would say that it's really not been rocket science. It's really not been any, shocking new techniques or special magic or anything like that. It's really basically just been hey, I've been better about nailing down the basics. I've been in a good place where I've been able to focus on things and lock in and just, not have to deal with a lot of the tiny compromises I used to make in my training. Been a little bit more aggressive about pushing myself and just trusting myself that I'll be able to handle more each week than I would have previously thought. And things are going super well. As always, don't hesitate to like, comment, subscribe, smash the notification bell, comment down below. Let me know what you'd like to see in future videos. Have a good one. I'll see you all next time.